This is In the Loop. I'm Christian Bryant. It may be a national holiday, but like the Energizer Bunny, the news just keeps going and going and going and going. In this special Labor Day edition of In the Loop, we'll look at the impact of these holiday weekends on the country's continuing battle with COVID-19. And we're putting the spotlight on the American worker and just how resilient many workers have had to be in this difficult year. But first, let's take a step back. We wanted to start today's show with a question. What does Labor Day mean to you? Does it mean back to school sales at Walmart, or just a free company holiday, or maybe an end of the summer barbecue? If so, that's definitely understandable, and that last one sounds pretty good right now. But at a time when the American worker is under a lot of pressure and millions of Americans find themselves out of work, it's worth remembering the almost completely forgotten history around the founding of Labor Day and the drastic steps the working class had to take to win some hard-fought rights.
They had a beef with capitalism. This was not working.
That's Priscilla Marolo, a professor and the author of From the Folks Who Brought You the Weekend, a short illustrated history of labor in the United States. And that beef she mentions between workers and the bosses stemmed from some pretty rough working conditions of the late 1800s, with work weeks sometimes stretching over 100 hours across 6 or 7 days a week and next to no job security.
People would get laid off constantly. And they'd get wage cuts, and then they'd get another wage cut, and then they'd get another wage cut. So the combination of these wage cuts and just the insecurity of life for people in this period.
Eventually, workers across several industries had had enough, and their response was to unionize and go on strike, which, for the record, was a pretty dangerous and combative ordeal.
If there's a big strike, someone's probably going to get killed. There were thousands of strikes in this period, and they're almost always about wage cuts. So Labor Day is born in that cauldron.
Over the course of decades, the labor movement won victories like a shorter work week, weekends, company holidays, and ended child labor and fair pay. And in the 1890s, 30 states and then eventually the federal government adopted a new holiday proposed by labor groups to observe and celebrate workers' rights. Fast forward to today, and while we do enjoy many of those workers' rights, the American worker is facing a lot of problems, including unemployment at Great Depression levels, and for those who are employed, a gradually expanding work week. 2 different studies found that work days had increased anywhere between 48.5 minutes to 3 hours. All the more reason to know your history on Labor Day, and maybe just take a minute to consider the rights of workers today. We don't mean to bum you out, but health experts are concerned about coronavirus spikes around holidays because, let's just say in 2020, there's a right way and a wrong way to celebrate. So what will the holiday weekend mean for the country's fight against this pandemic? Newsy's Lindsay Thies breaks it down.
Labor Day weekend can often mean traveling or gatherings, but during a pandemic, it could also mean a spike in COVID-19 cases.
There's always concern during holidays when people naturally, again, get together. There's always a risk for transmission. What we don't want to see is another increase in the number of cases.
Dr. John Hammer is an infectious disease specialist in Denver, Colorado. He says a surge could happen over the next 2 weeks because it happened before.
Well, what we saw around the state in Colorado, in really starting in late June, but certainly picking up in July after the 4th of July holiday, was a gradual increase in the number of cases.
Both new COVID-19 cases and deaths surged nationally in the weeks following the 4th of July. A Newsy analysis found new cases rose 36% in the 2 weeks after Independence Day. Deaths were up 30%.
It's hard to exactly say this was the result of Memorial Day or the 4th of July rather than the result of stay-at-home orders being lifted and the weather getting better.
Dr. AMESH ADALJA with Johns Hopkins University tells Newsy it's not all holiday socializing, but large mask-free gatherings that are to blame. Just this week, a man who attended the Sturgis motorcycle rally died from COVID-19. He's among more than 260 confirmed cases linked to the event. Doctors say these gatherings this summer led COVID-19 infection patterns to shift, where younger people were infected more and then spread the illness to others more in danger of hospitalization or dying.
That's likely the pattern we're going to see as we move forward, that if you are going to do this, that you realize that the virus is going to be with you and that there are some simple measures that you can take that will decrease your risk of spreading or acquiring the virus.
There are ways to lower risk this holiday. Things like holding small get-togethers outside, avoiding the barbecue or potluck by bringing your own food, and of course, wearing a mask and social distancing. Lindsay Thies, Newsy, Denver.
Since I'm here for the next half hour, feel free to send me a plate of whatever you're having.
We take a step away from the noise and spin to really hear the stories that need to be told. Newsy cuts through. Newsy cuts through.
Only 5% of airplane pilots are women. That makes Tammy Jo Schultz a rare breed. But some of what she's accomplished as a pilot makes her even more of an anomaly. Newsy's James Packard has more.
32,000 feet over Pennsylvania. A Southwest Airlines 737 was coming apart.
The first 0.01 second was determining of whether we'd maintained control.
For the 144 passengers on board, the next 17 minutes were terrifying.
Southwest 1380 has an engine fire descending.
Southwest 1380, you're descending right now?
Yes, sir, we're single engine descending, have a fire number 1.
The woman at the helm of the jet had never planned for something like this. But what her frightened passengers couldn't have known then was that she'd spent decades preparing for exactly this.
There was a number of questions about why I did what I did, how I did it, and I realized, looking back, that there's a lot of things that add up in life.
Tammy Jo Schultz's journey in aviation started long before Southwest Airlines Flight 1380 took off. In the 1970s, growing up near Holloman Air Force Base, she saw military pilots practice in-air combat and was hooked.
You were watching those dogfights overhead in New Mexico and thought, that's what I want to do with my entire career? Or was there some sense of at some point, I want to fly passengers?
I just wanted to fly, period. I didn't care what they gave me, just let me fly.
But the ones with the controls were all men, and they made it clear they didn't want her there. At a career day in her teens, an Air Force colonel told her girls didn't fly for a living. The Army and the Air Force both turned her away. One recruiter telling her, we aren't accepting applications from girls.
I think that all lives, if they're in any kind of forward movement, face obstacles.
It was years before she tried again, finally breaking into the Navy.
I started flying the A-7 in 1989.
She spent close to a decade there, making history when she became one of the first female pilots to fly the F-18 Hornet.
It was a complicated process to try to meld in and not bring attention to yourself, but not get pushed over.
But the bullying continued. Instructors telling her women didn't belong.
Growing up, my mom, she said, tell God on them. Just tell God on them and then pray for them.
Were there times where you thought, it's whether I want to do it or not, this path of doing it is just too emotionally abusive?
You know, no.
When she moved on to airline flying in the mid-90s, one male captain saw her and said, another empty kitchen.
If God's given me the motive and the merit to be here, they're really down the chain of command from God. So unless they show me the gate, I'm here.
Schultz's faith, a refuge in the fog of sexist assaults on her dreams, and a source of strength in the most trying moments of her long flying career.
Do you remember what you were doing right before it happened?
I had a check ride in just a couple of weeks after that, so I was studying for my check ride. So.
And then forget studying.
Right, those papers went flying.
Is your airplane physically on fire?
No, it's not on fire, but part of it's missing.
I wonder if your faith had the effect of reducing or eliminating your fear of death in that moment, and that allowed you to think more clearly.
Oh, without a doubt, yes.
Just moments before touchdown,
There's this silence when he clears us in, and then you hear this Heavenly Father.
a prayer captured on the cockpit voice recorder.
There was a hole and someone went out.
I'm sorry, you said there was a hole and somebody went out?
But even landing was part one. The explosion had ripped a window out of the jet, partially pulling passenger Jennifer Reardon out. Other passengers desperately fought to bring her back in the plane and perform CPR, but Reardon was pronounced dead after landing.
148 lives returning to their loved ones never eclipses the loss of one life. It was sobering when I stepped out, and it seemed like the entire aircraft, all of the passengers, had a hush over them. I think everyone felt the value of human life that day.
The NTSB found a fan blade in the engine broke off because of a slow-forming crack that went undetected. The FAA and Southwest Airlines vowed to make changes, but Schultz gave that flight everything in her, everything that those decades had taught her.
That pilot, I give it out to her. I mean, wow.
He has nerves of steel.
Tammy Jo Schultz became a symbol for women in a man's world.
You don't need to check your girl card. You can still be a woman and be a pilot.
The International Society of Women Airline Pilots reports just 5% of airline pilots worldwide are women.
It begs the question, why? Why aren't girls doing this? And I think part of it is you don't think about doing what you don't see being done.
But Schultz is a reminder. Doors are there to open, even if you have to be the one to push.
If there's obstacles that you have to cross, remember, you're helping to nudge the door open for the girls behind you.
James Packard, Newsy, Dallas.
We're going to land this sucker right here for a bit, but we'll be cleared for takeoff by the time you're back. For the next few minutes, we're going to focus on women at work. 4 out of every 10 U.S. businesses are owned by women. Still, a lot of industries like fishing are almost totally male-dominated, and that's partially what makes this next story so special. When the pandemic hit the New Hampshire fishing industry, a group of business owners who are women decided to give each other a helping hand. National reporter Chris Conti has more.
As certain as the changing tides, the Heidi and Elizabeth pulls into port at the same time each night. The reward for a 14-hour day of fishing off the New Hampshire coast is this weigh-in. But even in this picturesque New England town, COVID has found a way to impact both land and sea.
Our family had to adapt in order to survive.
This boat is named after Heidi Markey. That's her brother Jim at the helm. When COVID hit, wholesalers who would typically buy his fish disappeared.
It was hard for me to watch him not be able to provide for his family.
Heidi couldn't watch the family business sink. So she got to work using her skills as a career corporate marketer. In May, she founded the Daily Haul, a new business that sells fish directly to consumers.
We're pulling in fish every day, and it's not going to the local consumers, so we had to create that market for it.
Heidi quickly realized there were other women in the fishing industry struggling and being underrepresented. So she got to work with her female counterparts to sell their products as well.
The rules have been thrown out the window.
That includes Laura Brown.
I was ready for the best year ever. I was like, I got this.
As the owner of Fox Point Oysters, she had to reinvent herself after COVID. Heidi helped Laura expand to new farmers markets in the area. Both women are in the minority of the fishing industry. Even nationally, only 40% of U.S. businesses are women-owned.
I've had a couple careers in my life, and they've always sort of been male-dominated. So I stopped seeing it for a long time.
And it turns out the spirit of female ingenuity out here is spanning generational gaps.
This is like our first big purchase with the money we've been saving.
Not too many 15-year-olds run their own business.
£1 and 3, so that would be $5.
Even fewer have their commercial lobster fishing license.
It's easy. I mean, it wasn't at first, but it's get picked up a lot.
But then there's Ella Byrne.
It's very male-heavy industry. All the guys down there, I'm the only girl who fishes. Let me see.
With guidance from Heidi, Ella has been able to learn the ins and outs of customer service.
Heidi, she's helped me a lot with this too. She has been a great help in teaching me how to run the business and be supportive, and we all help each other out.
She advertises on Facebook, sells the lobster she catches right out of her parents' garage. Even as a 15-year-old, she's seen the importance of women supporting one another.
I hope more girls my age see this and think, oh wow, this looks like fun, I want to do that.
She has everything in front of her, and it's really helping mentor and guide her into growing her own business and establishing herself.
So with their livelihoods hanging in the balance, these women are keeping each other afloat, with at least some hope off the horizon.
I think women are underrepresented in a lot of industries, so I think it's important to highlight them.
In Portsmouth, New Hampshire, I'm Chris Conti reporting.
It's been a hell of a year watching states go on lockdown, stay on lockdown, begin to reopen, and for some, pause reopening or go back under those restrictions. But as of today, at least 20 states have widely reopened or are in the process of reopening businesses, which means many Americans can get back to work. And as an employee, you might have some questions ranging from disclosing COVID-19 symptoms to worker protections if someone gets sick at your job. Luckily, Newsy's Kat Sandoval spoke to some experts to answer some of these very topical questions.
We wanted to explore what rights employees have when they're asked to go back to work. So we asked 3 questions to 3 experts. Question 1, if I get COVID-19 at work, am I entitled to workers' compensation?
Workers' comp is a state-by-state system, and every state has a different law. And I know it's very hard in some states. If you have an occupational illness and your employer contests it to show that it was work-related, the burden becomes on the worker.
You've probably seen this lately. Retail workers attacked by customers. A customer sprays Lysol in a cashier's eye. A guard at a Family Dollar store is killed for denying entry to someone not wearing a mask. Which leads us to our second question. Are companies obligated to protect workers from challenging customers who don't want to follow the rules?
The general rule in any type of law is that if you don't know something's going to happen, if you don't have knowledge, then you are not liable. So therefore, employers are probably not going to be held liable if something unfortunate happens in a moment's notice in the office or at work.
Employers don't have an obligation to protect workers from customers who are being difficult or, if they attack them, they need to call police. If someone's hurt, they do have that obligation, but they have no other obligation to protect them from COVID-19, from customers who are not social distancing or not wearing masks.
And our last question. If I make more money from unemployment than my regular salary, do I need to go back to work?
If you're making more money on unemployment than you were making at work, you're still going to have to go back to work if the job opens up again. You can't refuse to work because you're making more money.
Your unemployment is supposed to be in lieu of your salary. If you're making salary, then get off your couch and get back there and go to work. That's the bottom line.
Kat Sandoval, Newsy, Chicago.
You should know by now that by watching this show, you're at high risk for hearing me solicit Twitter feedback. But seriously, hit us up using the hashtag #NewsyInTheLoop. If you're kind enough, I might just share my at work playlist with you. You'd be hard pressed to find a business that hasn't been touched by the coronavirus. And small businesses, by the government's definition, that's businesses with fewer than 500 employees, have been hit the hardest. Earlier in the year, the federal government rolled out the Paycheck Protection Program, a loan program to help small businesses stay afloat. But that program was finite, and a survey of small business owners gives us some insight into how they feel federal and state governments have or haven't helped during this pandemic. National reporter Jessica Perez has more.
The purpose of the survey is really to find out how small businesses across the country feel about the public policies that they're working with at the local, state, and national levels. Do they feel supported? Do they feel like the right policies are in place? Are things changing year over year for them?
Thumbtack, an online company that connects people with local independent professionals in industries like construction, wellness, and music, conducts a small business friendliness survey every year. This year, they wanted to check in with the small businesses on their site to see how they were doing amid this COVID-19 pandemic.
What we did notice is that there was strong kind of divergence between how many felt their states and local governments were doing versus what they saw from the federal government. And to put that in perspective, we saw many states score A's or A minuses or B's in terms of, that kind of local response. But at the federal level, almost universally, people felt like what they were saying was not good enough.
Nate Chai, who leads Thumbtack's pro-engagement team, says overwhelmingly, small business owners gave the federal government an F when it came to their response.
We saw several states earn Fs, and unfortunately, the worst of those were in kind of descent, starting from the bottom up. Arizona was at the bottom, followed by Oregon, Missouri, Georgia, and Tennessee in this survey.
The highest ranked states were Vermont, which received an A+, followed by A's for Rhode Island, Connecticut, Massachusetts, and an A- for Maryland. Gerard Castanol, the engineering and operations manager for Trevor Technical Solutions in Maryland, took part in the survey.
It started off really good here in Maryland. They were very proactive in how to address the pandemic. And what I basically mean is they were going by the science.
Castanol says the funding, though, from state and federal levels was lacking, and information and guidance about programs and how to operate has been inconsistent. Castanol says before the pandemic, 80% of their company's revenue came from work from the government. Over the last 3 months, that dwindled down to 5%, putting his business in a dire state and prompting him to lay off staff.
It's a survival instinct right now that we're operating.
Of the roughly 2,400 businesses that took the survey, 65% had one employee, in that the person owned their business and works alone. 28% had 2 to 5 employees, and the remaining 6% had more than 6 employees.
Given what's going on, it's a great time to consider, reaching out to small businesses if you've got those projects on the back burners, and finding the right ways to support local businesses if you have the means.
We've got to find a solution to this. Or America's going to suffer ultimately if the small business isn't there.
Thumbtack is encouraging people to support their local businesses in any way they can right now, as many feel uncertain when or if they will recover from this economic downturn. I'm Jessica Paris reporting.
That's it for us, folks. Thanks for tuning in to our special Labor Day episode of In the Loop. I'll be back tomorrow with better looking hair for more In the Loop. Same time, same place. Top stories from Newsy are headed your way right now.